Hey everyone, welcome back to Philosophy versus Science. Here's something that's been eating at me. What if the very fact that you can doubt everything proves God exists? That question, that's what René Descartes was obsessing over 400 years ago when he locked himself in a room and doubted literally everything until he found the one thing he couldn't doubt. I think, therefore I am. But here's the wild part. He used that certainty to prove God must exist. Today we're resurrecting the father of modern philosophy to face the ultimate challenge. Can pure reason prove God exists? Descartes claimed that the very fact you can think of perfection proves a perfect being. God must exist to put that idea in your mind. But modern neuroscience suggests that thoughts of perfection, infinity, and God might just be how our pattern-seeking brains cope with uncertainty and mortality. You are the jury. Here's what I need to know. Can thinking prove God exists, or do our brains just create the idea of God to feel safe in an uncertain universe? Rene, welcome to 2025. I have to be honest, your rational proofs for God feel impossible to defend now. We can trace religious experiences to specific brain regions. The temporal lobe creates mystical visions. The anterior cingulate processes transcendence. Mirror neurons make us feel connected to something larger. Your idea of perfection that supposedly proves God exists, that's just how human brains work. We extrapolate from good to better to perfect. No divine input required.
But you've missed the profound logic here. Yes, humans can imagine improvements, a faster horse, a sharper sword, but the idea of absolute perfection, of infinite being, of God, this cannot come from mere extrapolation from finite experience. Tell me, where did you, a finite and imperfect being, acquire the standard by which you judge things imperfect? How do you recognize limitation without some concept of the unlimited?
That's just evolutionary psychology. Brains that could imagine better solutions survived and reproduced. We evolved pattern-seeking minds that naturally extrapolate beyond immediate experience. The idea of infinity isn't mysterious, it's just taking more to its logical extreme.
But listen carefully to what you're saying. You claim mindless evolution programmed minds to seek truth, recognize logic, contemplate infinity. Does this not strike you as remarkable? If our rational faculties are reliable enough to do science, why should they be unreliable when they point toward God?
Because we can test scientific theories against reality. But your God proofs are just mental exercises. They don't predict anything measurable.
They predict the most important thing of all, that reason itself is trustworthy, that the universe is intelligible, that mathematical truths discovered by minds actually describe reality. Without God as the guarantor of this harmony between thought and being, your entire scientific enterprise rests on blind faith.
Wait, you're saying I need God to trust my own reasoning? That seems circular. I need to trust reason to evaluate your proof, but you're saying reason only works if God exists.
Not circular, foundational. I begin with the one thing I cannot doubt, my own thinking existence. From this certainty, I discover that I possess ideas of perfection, infinity, necessary existence that my finite mind could never generate. These ideas require a source adequate to their content, a perfect, infinite, necessary being.
But here's what bothers me about that logic. Children develop ideas of perfection, fairness, infinity without any mystical experiences. They just interact with the world and their minds naturally generalize. Why invoke God when psychology explains it perfectly well?
Because psychology merely describes how ideas appear in minds. It cannot explain why those minds should be capable of recognizing truth at all. Why should a random evolutionary process produce minds that can discover genuine mathematical laws, moral principles, logical necessities? This alignment between mind and a reality points to a common source, a rational creator.
Let me get personal here. I've had moments, holding my newborn daughter, seeing the northern lights, solving a difficult equation, where I felt connected to something infinite. But we know now these experiences correlate with specific brain states: decreased default mode network, increased gamma waves, flood of oxytocin and dopamine. If God exists, why does the experience of the divine depend so heavily on brain chemistry?
When you held your daughter and felt touched by the infinite, did you think interesting neurochemistry? Or did you recognize something eternally valuable about love, about the miracle of consciousness encountering consciousness? Your science describes the material conditions accompanying these experiences, but it cannot touch their meaning or their truth claims about reality.
But that's just the feeling of meaning, not actual meaning. We're really good at finding patterns and significance where none exist. Faces in clouds, messages in coincidences, purpose in random events. Why isn't the experience of God just another case of our brains creating meaning where none exists?
Because unlike faces in clouds, the idea of God illuminates everything else. It explains why mathematics works, why consciousness can grasp truth, why you feel moral obligations even when they conflict with self-interest. Remove God, and these fundamental features of human experience become inexplicable mysteries.
But evolution explains all that. Math works because brains that tracked patterns survived. We feel moral obligations because cooperation helped our ancestors. Consciousness developed because self-aware animals made better survival decisions.
You keep appealing to evolution as if it were an intelligent designer. Evolution did this. Evolution selected that. But evolution is supposed to be a mindless process. How can mindless processes reliably produce minds capable of discovering truth? You're smuggling in the very intelligence you claim to explain away.
That's actually a really good point. I do talk about evolution like it has intentions, but it's just selection pressure operating over deep time.
Selection pressure toward what end? Survival? But many truths humans discover, abstract mathematics, moral principles, aesthetic beauty, serve no survival function whatever. Yet you trust these discoveries as genuine insights into reality. Why should mindless evolution produce minds capable of transcending evolutionary purposes?
Maybe it's just a byproduct, like once you have brains capable of survival-relevant thinking, they can also think about abstract stuff as a side effect.
A remarkably convenient side effect. That mindless processes should accidentally produce minds capable of mathematics, music, morality, and the contemplation of God. Does this not suggest that mind was somehow present in the process from the beginning?
You're doing what theologians always do, finding gaps in scientific explanation and inserting God. But historically, every time we've done that, science has eventually filled the gap.
But I'm not pointing to gaps in scientific knowledge. I'm pointing to the very preconditions that make scientific knowledge possible. Why should there be discoverable laws? Why should human reason be capable of grasping them? Why should mathematics work? These aren't gaps to be filled. They're the foundations that make gap-filling possible.
Here's something that honestly keeps me up at night. The more we learn about the universe, the more fine-tuned it appears for consciousness to emerge. The constants of physics, the formation of stars and planets, the evolution of complexity, change any of these by tiny amounts, and nothing interesting happens, ever. Are we discovering evidence for your God, or are we just examples of survivorship bias? The only observers who could exist are the ones in a universe that allows observers.
You've stumbled upon one of the most powerful arguments for God's existence. The extraordinary fine-tuning of physical constants, the mathematical elegance underlying natural law, the emergence of minds capable of comprehending the cosmos, all this points toward intelligent design. But notice, you resist this conclusion not because of evidence, but because of philosophical commitment to materialism.
I resisted because there could be infinite universes with different constants. We only observe this one because we couldn't exist in the others. No designer needed, just selection bias.
Infinite universes? Now who is appealing to unobservable, untestable hypotheses? You criticize my belief in God as unscientific, then postulate infinite unobservable realities to avoid the obvious conclusion that this universe shows signs of intelligent design.
Fair point. But even if the universe is designed, why does that have to be the Christian God? Why not a team of cosmic engineers, or a computer simulation, or something totally alien to human concepts?
Because the designer must possess, at minimum, the perfections we observe in creation. The intelligence manifest in natural law, the power evident in cosmic forces, the goodness reflected in consciousness capable of recognizing truth and beauty. When we think through what such a being would be like, we arrive at what humans call God.
But if God is perfect, why is there so much suffering? Disease, natural disasters, cruelty? Doesn't this count against a benevolent designer?
The existence of suffering presupposes the existence of beings capable of recognizing that something ought to be otherwise. But whence comes this ought? Your very ability to judge creation as flawed requires standards of goodness, justice, and perfection that transcend material processes. The problem of evil assumes objective moral truth, which itself points toward God as the source of moral law.
That's clever, but it doesn't answer the emotional force of the objection. When a child dies of cancer, when earthquakes kill thousands, how do you reconcile that with a loving God?
I cannot pretend to understand all of God's purposes. But I can observe that the same universe that produces suffering also produces beings capable of compassion, courage, and the recognition that suffering ought to be alleviated. This moral consciousness itself seems to require explanation beyond mere matter in motion.
Rene, I have to admit something. When we started, I thought your rational proofs were medieval nonsense, but you've made me realize how many assumptions I take for granted. That reason is reliable, that the universe is intelligible, that mathematical discoveries reveal truth rather than useful fictions. Maybe the question isn't whether we can prove God exists, but whether we can make sense of science, consciousness, and moral experience without something like God as foundation.
And perhaps you've helped me see that the relationship between divine mind and material creation is more intimate than I first imagined. Your discoveries about the brain, evolution, and cosmic development don't eliminate God. They reveal the extraordinary subtlety of divine action in the world. The God who creates through billions of years of cosmic evolution, who builds consciousness through natural processes, who allows free beings to discover truth through reason. This God is far more magnificent than one who simply speaks creation into existence instantaneously.
The truth now rests with you. Give your verdict. Think about this honestly. Right now, you're using reason to evaluate arguments about reason's reliability. You're trusting that logic can lead to truth, that evidence matters more than wishful thinking, that some beliefs are better justified than others. Descartes argued that this very capacity for rational thought requires God as its foundation, that without a perfect being guaranteeing the harmony between mind and reality, we have no reason to trust our reasoning about anything, including science itself. Modern science reveals the extraordinary fine-tuning of the universe for consciousness, the reliability of mathematical reasoning, the emergence of minds capable of discovering truth, but it cannot explain why any of this should be possible in a purely material universe. Are these just brute facts we have to accept without explanation? Or do they point towards something like what humans have always called God, the intelligent source of the intelligible cosmos? Some of you will trust that future science will explain away every apparent sign of design. Others will see in reason itself, in consciousness, in the mathematical elegance of nature, evidence for the divine mind that makes all knowledge possible. What's your verdict? Can thinking prove God exists? Or does the idea of God just help finite minds cope with infinite mystery? Final thought. Drop your verdict in the comments. Do you think your ability to reason proves God exists? And if you want to see which philosopher challenges us next, maybe Hume on why we can't prove anything, or Aquinas with his logical proofs, hit subscribe. The question of whether reason leads to God is just beginning.